Okay, everybody, if I could ask for silence while everybody files in. Before we kick off our program today, this International Convention Center is a world-class facility. And one of the reasons at the CSIR that we have the unqualified audits that we have the safety record that we have, is that we take health, safety, quality, and everything that goes with it incredibly seriously. So here to give you the briefing for the safety and the use of the CSIR ICC, we have a representative of the conference center. I'm going to be like the captain on the aeroplane, and I'm going to ask you to please pay close attention, even if you've heard it before.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to the CSIR International Convention Center. I'm VP Pretoria, Safety and Setup Coordinator of the Center. Before you proceed, I'm just going to give you a couple of health protocols as well as evacuation protocols of the Center. Kindly make use of our hand sanitizer stations located within the communal areas as well as the venues as frequently as possible. Should you fall ill or require medical attention, kindly report to the reception area whereby a first aid facility as well as qualified paramedics will be made available to you. In the unlikely event of an emergency, an alarm will sound throughout the building. Trained responders will give instructions on evacuation. Stay calm. Take only belongings that you can carry. Walk in an orderly manner. Do not run. Responders will lead you to an emergency exit, then to the assembly point. Restrooms are available throughout the building. Please look out for signage. As this is a public building, please do not leave your valuables unattended. Free wireless internet access is available throughout the building. Please select free CSIR ICC on your device. No password is required. For assistance, please call on any of our staff members who will contact a technician to provide support. Thank you and enjoy your session.
I must say they do that so well. I always feel like I need to applaud. Okay, so let's kick off. I'm going to leave the official welcome to the man I politely referred to as my boss. So Nduvo will follow me and he will do the official welcome. So I'm going to just thank everybody for coming to start off with, and I'm going to welcome those who are online. I'm going to remind us that we do have a hybrid session going, so we do have people in the room who will be the Microsoft Teams host, and if there are questions, our panelists, etc., know that those questions may come up. So we may at times put that Teams meeting on the screen so that you can see you're being joined. I believe we've got over 50 people already online. The other thing that I would like to remind you of is that we are living in the social media generation, and my bonus depends on how many likes we get. I'm joking. But we would like you to engage with us on our social media platforms. My communication team will be putting slides up intermittently with QR codes, there we go, and links that you can follow. But most of you will have received an invitation to this or seen an advert to this event, which is why you're here, and in that you would have been able to go to the website. All else fails, go to the website, ncpc.co.za, and at the bottom you'll get links to our LinkedIn, our Facebook, I just can't call it X, our Twitter, sorry, Elon Musk, and all the other the platforms that we're on. The other thing you need to know is that we are doing a carbon footprint of this event. We have asked delegates in an email that you received to let us know where you're coming from. If you haven't done that, we're going to ask you to, during the course of the next 2 days, scan the QR code for the carbon footprint. It'll appear on multiple screens throughout the days. And go and fill in the form which tells us where you came from. Where did you drive or where did you fly from? Your biggest carbon footprint at an event is the travel that you took to get here. We will take care of the food and the lights and all that stuff. Please just let us know where you came from, then we can have a more accurate measure of the carbon footprint of this conference. So it falls to me now to hand over to the director of the NCPC. Before I do, I'm going to give a bit of context. The National Cleaner Production Centre has had the mandate from its core funder, Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, for the last 22 years to support industry to transition to a cleaner, greener, more resource-efficient way of doing business. In order to escalate that, we started quite actively, approximately 12 years ago now, with awareness and communication in mainstreaming into industry and the public. And for that reason, we started a conference every 2 years. The first one was held in 2013. If I look around the room, I get 4 or 5 people who've been at all of them. Obviously, there was an interruption for COVID, but we forged forward nonetheless, and in 2022, we had our most recent conference. So welcome to the 6th biennial conference of the NCPC South Africa. Today, we also welcome the industrial parks community because the International Conference on Eco-Industrial Parks and Areas, I need to say both because different organizations call it different names. That will be hosted here in Diamond tomorrow, but their first session kicks off in Ruby after afternoon tea. So we welcome them. We're so excited to have it together with our conference this year. It adds a whole new dimension, and as you hear from the speakers throughout the day, industrial spaces are incredibly important to the sustainability journey. So Nduvo, where are you? He's here, okay. With that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Nduvo Rapulu. He has been the director of the NCPC since 2006, so yes, he knows his stuff, and it's under his leadership that we are here today.
Good morning, everyone. And when she mentions the years, I'm thinking, doesn't necessarily mean experience. Good to be a fossil, however. Allow me to recognize your presence and welcome you. It's a pleasure to host you for the next 2 days, and for some of you it's now 3 days, because we were here yesterday for the whole day. But for the purpose of these 2 days, if you allow, not necessarily in order of importance, but because the focus of the 6th biannual conference is specifically because of the projects that we are undertaking with these stakeholders, allow me to just mention most of them, starting with UNIDO, SECO, GIZ, NBI, SANEDI, Green Cape, the Flanders, the Belgium government. We have colleagues from other NCPCs in the continent and from Latin America and Europe and Asia. We also have strategic national government departments here like DFFE, DWS, Department of Electricity and Energy, and the provincial departments. Yesterday we spent most of the day with Gauteng, Limpopo, Free State, Eastern Cape, Mpumalanga, and Northern Cape and Northwest Province. And there are industrial parks, and there are management teams, and the provincial economic development agencies that are responsible for the 12 industrial parks where we are doing our pilot works. I appreciate your presence this morning. We also have our host and our managers in the CSIR. I won't say much because Dr. Sitlapelo is going to introduce that part just after me. The essence of the NCPC and relevant to this event, we were tasked to facilitate the transition of the Republic of South Africa's economy or industry to a low carbon and climate resilient economy. And this event, in my mind, had 4 expectations or outcomes that I'm expecting. The first one is that we're going to share with you the case studies coming out of the work we have been doing for the last 3 years, since the last conference. The second one is that we're going to show you that it is possible to transit from a heavy mechanical climate economy to a low carbon one, sustainable for that matter. And we also want to create an opportunity every second year where we bring all the stakeholders together, and we want to create an opportunity for networking between the engineering and environmental consulting industry and industries or companies that are present in the room, and also interact with the CSIR. We want to also invite you to use this week to give us inputs into the work that we are presenting and our stakeholders are presenting. When you attend sessions, we try and have the different stakeholders or NCPCs and project partners globally and in South Africa or in the continent to share with us their lessons. And from that, we are hoping that we will be able to solicit your inputs, your participation, so we can begin to build new knowledge, a body of knowledge with regard to the methodologies and the tools that we are testing and we are working with. If you are interested in having a closer relationship with the National Cleaner Production Center of South Africa, our website, www.ncpc.co.za. It's very much up to date. It's also interactive, so you could speak to us and you would get an instant response from our, I'm looking at the person who's in charge. She says it won't respond, so it's not smart yet. So one of our projects will be getting the site to be smart enough. But there is an opportunity to send communication or messages through the website, and there's someone who sits and interact with that. We are managed by the CSIR, and they provide the sustainability that our funders and our donors, including the South African government, National Treasury, confidence that everything about us is in compliance with the Public Finance Management Act. I want to ask you to join me in welcoming Dr. Bethwell Sitlapelo. He is the Executive Director for CSIR Smart Place Cluster, where the NCPC is hosted, to just come and welcome us and share with us.
Hi, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not going to take time in terms of the recognition of the participants. I think Mr. Rafulu did a sterling job. So my responsibility was to welcome you, but I thought the best way of welcoming you is to share with you about what the CSR is all about. So, the CSR is about 79 years old this year. It was put together by an act of parliament and has a responsibility to conduct directed research in a multidisciplinary way. Actually, I can offer that the CSR is one of the most multidisciplinary institutions in South Africa in that regard. So it conducts research, development, and innovation with the public sector, with the private sector, with civil society to attend to the different challenges that South Africa has. And therefore, just to underpin what I've just said, our vision is to accelerate socio-economic prosperity in South Africa using leading-edge innovation. And if you look at our mission, it's quite clear that we won't do that alone. We do that collaboratively. We don't only develop technological solutions, but we also localize imported technology and produce knowledge solutions for the sustainability of industry and society. Again, to underpin what we do, we are governed by a set of values that we espouse to, and these values are mnemonicked in the name EPIC, and I'm not going to go through them in detail, but these values include excellence, people-centeredness, integrity, and collaboration. And indeed, the hosted programs, the two hosted programs that are hosting this conference, the NCPC and NFTN, collaborate with the CSIR and are embedded within the cluster called Smart Places, which I'll talk to in a bit. But again, back to the CSIR. The CSIR has a number of strategic objectives, 5 of them. The first one being to conduct research, development, and innovation, to produce transformative technologies and accelerate their diffusion, whilst doing that with the aim of improving competitiveness of industry. And therefore, we have a vested interest in the discussions that will happen today. Further on, our work enjoins us to support a capable state. The next strategic objective is the building and the transformation of the human capital base and infrastructure. The last strategic objective is, whilst we are doing that, we diversify our own income and maintain financial sustainability and good governance. And I'll talk a little bit about good governance. Without spending too much on the slide that you see here, you can appreciate that the CSIR is quite a large organization, over 2,000 staff members, but note that the asset base is over 1,500. What is it that we have as outputs or produce to indicate the type of work that we do? You can see our outputs range from publications, priority patents, new technology demonstrators, license agreements, to projects that produce solutions, as I've indicated before, to support a capable state. And the CSIR takes adherence to governance legislation very seriously. We are now in our 15th year of a clean audit as an institution. The operating model of the CSIR is premised on 3 divisions. The first one being advanced chemistry and life sciences. The second one being advanced production and security. And the last one being smart society. I belong to the last division, smart society. And each of these divisions has got 3 clusters. The cluster that I lead is Smart Places, and is a cluster that I want to focus a little bit just to share with you some of the work that we do that lend itself to the relevance of the themes of these 2 days conference, being circular economy and sustainability. But before I do that, let me share with you the business model of the CSIR. So, as I've indicated, as I was going through the mandate of the CSIR, one of the things that we do is to develop technology that is bespoke to particular challenges in the country, not only in South Africa, but also in Africa and the rest of the world. And we produce products that manifest themselves in terms of licensing to go into the market. Or we develop custom solutions for particular clients, or we produce evidence-based decision support systems or platforms that could be IT-based. We have a number of national facilities where we can test and evaluate technologies or solutions. We also host programs, and I gave an example of the National Cleaner Production Center, which is hosting you. But we also incubate industry development, especially from SMMEs. I've talked about one of the modalities that we get our technological solutions out to the market is through technology licensing. But we also are involved in human capital development with regards to specialized training. And lastly, we provide highly specialized services. In my cluster, we would like to think of ourselves as we are in the business of using science, technology, and innovation to bring harmony to the natural environment and the built environment, including human activities, for social, economic, and ecological sustainability, for public good, and for industry development. My cluster has got 7 units, if I may call them that we call impact areas. I'm not going to talk at length on them, as I've indicated. The unit that is hosting you is called Industry Support Programs, which has 2 key programs, the National Cleaner Production Center and the National Foundry Technology Network. Next slides, I will give you a semblance or a sample of some of the technological solutions we are working on, we have worked on in partnership with stakeholders. Let me start with this technology, and it's from the impact area called Functional Building Infrastructure. And it's a technology that descends the challenge in the built environment, where we know that as South Africa, the slow delivery of infrastructure, noting the cost of the Portland, ordinary Portland cement. Also, the issue of a large carbon footprint with regards to the operations in OPC, cement manufacturing. And therefore, we set to look at these challenges and provide solutions. In that regard, we came up with a technology underpinned by what we call the vertical shaft kiln, the VSK technology, and we are piloting this technology at Ecindustria. Some of the attributes of the technology is that we call it the green cement, which reduces the carbon footprint by up to 40% and lower the use of the OPC clinker by about 40%. And our tests indicate that our green cement is on par with regards to the important attributes of durability and strength. Further on, this technology is lowering the production cost for cement by about 30%. And lastly on this, the technology is also lowering CAPEX cost associated with the manufacture of OPC. The next technology is a technology coming from the impact area called sustainable ecosystems. If you live in coastal areas, especially like the Western Cape, you understand that from time to time, there's what is called harmful algal blooms. We determined that as a challenge because it has a sizable impact on the economy, on the fishing industry. For an example, the rock lobster loss, when there's a large algal bloom event, ranges from 200 to 2,000 tons of lobster lost, with an estimated cost of up to 80 million US. And therefore, we looked at this as a challenge, and as a response, we then came up with a satellite-based image analysis technology, also using AI, where we developed a software that can look at the situation and provide a decision support system or tool for the fisheries and the aquaculture industry. In the impact area called holistic climate change, we contend with the fact that climate change is real, climate change is impactful, and we need solutions as a country to contend with climate change. And therefore, we developed a climate change prediction system which provides customers with a reliable climate change focused intelligence at a seasonal resolution. And in all of these technologies, I've got the contact details of the people that head those impact areas. From the energy point of view, as you know, and these are some of the things that you are going to be discussing in this conference, we know in South Africa we are a coal-based energy provision country, and therefore decarbonization is key for us. As you may know, South Africa, we have an obligation to reduce greenhouse gases up to 320 metric tons of carbon dioxide by 2030 and 45% by 2050. ESCOM is contending with electricity provision challenges, and going forward, it's looking at reducing their fleet generation by about 10 gigawatt by 2030. But we know in South Africa, as we move towards renewable energy, we are creating a negative technology balance of payment, which we need to start contending with. And I've got the figures there just indicating the growth of the imports with regards to solar panels, lithium batteries, and inverters in 2023 and 2022. So like you can see that there's a huge amount of these components that has increased in those 2 years. We know as South Africa, in order to ensure that most of the country is covered with regards to energy provision, there's a need for us to develop and make available small-scale embedded generation. And one of the things that you'll be discussing is carbon tax. And in the Energy Center at the CSIR, we are also contending with this. So, the CSIR then, in recognizing the evolution in the energy sector, put together 2 laboratories. I'll first start with the PV module testing lab. We put together this laboratory to assist industry to ensure the quality of the PV modules that get to be imported into South Africa. and we have incorporated artificial intelligence into determining defects. The next one is we established an indoor energy storage test bed. We do the same as we do for the PV modules. This laboratory has been recently established in 2023 in partnership with Vito of Flanders. From the water side, as a South African, you would understand that acid mine drainage is quite a challenge, because also exacerbated by mining activities. We know that at the moment there's no really pragmatic and efficient solution to AMD, and the AMD solutions that are available today also need to deal with high sludge production, which has not yet been sorted out. So as a response, the CSIR then developed a technology, or is developing a technology. It's not yet in the market per se, called the AMD solution with a circular economy focus, where this technology, we have proven that it reduces sludge generation, the brine treatment using membrane filtration, and enhances the efficiency of the treatment operation, also offsets operating costs associated with AMD. But more in particular, we are able to recover valuable minerals, rare earth elements, sulfuric acid, and most importantly, water. This other technology from the water center is where we treat wastewater, and we valorize wastewater byproducts to produce biogas. And therefore, we are hoping that this will then improve the sustainability of wastewater treatment works. Lastly, from water, we know that the water provision grid does not reach all angles in the country, and therefore we have developed what we call a decentralized wastewater treatment system, DWATS, which we coupled with a chemical-free sanitation technology in order to reach out to the far-flung areas in the country. Lastly, in my presentation, and I've talked a little bit about this, and hosting in smart places of these two important programs of the DTIC, Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. What is the relevance of these two with regards to the CSIR and smart places? As you know, NCPC is focusing on resource efficiency, water, energy, and waste. And therefore, it has found a good home, not only in smart places, but within the CSIR, and therefore we work in a collaborative manner with the NCPC to contribute towards the fulfillment of the mandate of the DTIC. The second program, we also do the same, the NFTN, in terms of supporting the revival of the foundry industry in the country. With that, ladies and gentlemen, you are welcome to South Africa, you are welcome to the CSIR, and I hope you will take, you'll have some take-homes from the presentation that I've made. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Setlapelo. Bethwell. Okay, so you guys are going to get really, really bored if we don't sort of flash things in front of you every now and again. I don't know, looking around the room, I'm pretty sure I'm not the only parent of a teenager. So there needs to be movement, there needs to be things keeping your attention. So every now and again, during the next 2 days, we're going to be using a platform called Mentimeter to pop a couple of quizzes in front of you. No one's going to hold any of your answers against you. Everything is completely anonymous. If no Poppy Act has been breached. But we're just going to ask you a couple of questions, just to engage with the audience, just to get a sense of what people are thinking. I mean, maybe we're having this conference and we think everyone's concerned about decarbonisation. Maybe it doesn't actually cross your minds from one day to the next. Well, like, what are these guys talking about? We want to know this. So do us a favor, when you see those popping up on the screen from time to time, if a host says, listen, won't you go and answer a couple of questions, just pop out your phones and do that. As you heard earlier today, if you've got data challenges, there is a free Wi-Fi. Then on the back of your tag, there is the QR code which will take you to the NCPC's website. And no, Nduvo, there's not someone sitting there all the time. I don't think the CSIR would allow a salary for someone to do that, and I don't think we've got a bot yet. So, but we will get back to people as quickly as we can. But for today and tomorrow, we've got a page dedicated to this event that has got the program, it's got the carbon footprint questions, it's going to have links, and it will be updated throughout the day. So if you go there and there's something missing, then it should be later during the day. We do have printed programs as well. If you didn't receive one at registration, our team on the sides, they will have them, but also we didn't print so many that everyone would have one, because guess what? We're a resource efficiency program. And so just feel free to please leave that on the table so that people can refer to it. Okay, now you're going to be listening to the people you came to listen to and not to me. So I'm going to ask my plenary panel if you would come up onto the stage and take your seats. I'm going to let Mike facilitate the introduction of the panel members, but today our plenary discussion is facilitated by the CEO of Green Cape and currently a CSIR board member, Mr. Mike Mulcahy, and I did have to ask him how to say that before the session. So Mike has been a long-standing partner and friend of the NCPC, and Green Cape has been established in the Western Cape to do very similar work to what we do on a national level. We don't cross, we cross over a bit. We actually support one another here and there, and we felt that this was a really sort of good integration. And people often say, well, you're different to Green Cape, so here, today we're answering you. Today we're both here on the stage, we're both talking the language, and Mike is going to lead you through a panel discussion about the impacts of decarbonisation and carbon on industry. I see Prof. Mark is coming down there. Come on, can have a seat. I thought maybe if I talked, you wouldn't have to watch them all. Now we're going to watch them all. Okay, let me know when you're ready, Mike. And then while they get settled, I'll mention one more thing. We have a couple of organizations who are partners who have got little exhibition spaces. If you'd like to have a word with UNIDO, with the Global Eco-Industrial Parks Program, with the NFTN, with obviously the NCPC, and also then with the CSIR's scientists and researchers that do that cool green cement, they've got some exhibition spaces outside. Mike, I think I've filled up enough airtime. It's over to you.
Thanks very much, Julie, and thank you very much to the team at the CSIR and NCPC for hosting us this morning. It's wonderful to be here, and it's an absolute pleasure to be able to facilitate this incredible panel. We're going to be talking about carbon, and in particular industry, what's happening, why it's happening, and how we can be thinking about this to be resilient and competitive into the future. Perhaps to set the scene, I think this room will all be aware that the trajectory of growth that the world has used historically is incompatible with long-term success for humans as a species. So this is the macro challenge that we face over the next decades, and it is the challenge that many countries are trying to solve. and it's what the original thinking around CBAM was trying to support. There's been a lot of conversations about CBAM over the last 5 or 6 years, and I think it's really important for us to try to practically, specifically and materially locate CBAM in the South African context. In a second, I'll ask Henrik from Hulamin to open this conversation for us to try to locate, as a large household manufacturing name in South Africa, what does this mean for their business? What was the thought process that they've gone through to try to make sense of it? And what are some of the actions that they've taken to walk through this journey of complexity? And Hulamin really is kind of first through the gate from a South African perspective for dealing with CBAM. Henrik, over to you, please.
Good. Thank you very much. And good morning to everybody. Mike asked me to just start with a brief introduction of who Hulamin is, for those that don't know us. So we are an aluminium rolling mill. We produce aluminium flat-rolled products. This could be household foil of down to 0.07 millimeter thick, up to 60 millimeter thick heat-treated plates for manufacturing industry. Beverage cans, your normal cool drink cans, the body is one of our products, and the lid is another major product. So we export roughly 50% or a little bit more than 50% of our total production outside of South Africa. The reason for building a large industry in South Africa that caters for more than the local market is that you have to have a certain level of production before you become efficient. And in terms of world manufacturers, Hulamin is really small. So, but we still export 50%. So also into automotive, heat exchanger products, etc. So we produce aluminium sheet of all shapes and sizes, thicknesses, alloys, and different markets. I have a background in engineering, being engineering manager in the company. So the fact that I'm here today to talk about sustainability is something that just crept onto my desk over the last 8 years or so. And today we talk about how the world has changed around manufacturing, and specifically with CBAM, and how that is impacting industry. And us specifically as an exporter, something like 22% of our revenue in last year came from the European Union. And therefore, when they introduced CBAM measures, then it definitely affects an exporter like ourselves. So I think most people understand that South Africa have a carbon-based or a coal-based electricity supply, which means that we are probably the biggest emitters of greenhouse gas emissions from our electricity grid in the world, I think. So our products, when they go into the EU, we started becoming aware of this, me personally, only by about 2020, when I started attending the European Commission, started having what they called town hall meetings and so on, with experts in South Africa that were already well versed. But that was my first engagement with the topic, understanding where they're heading. And then, of course, the legislation got brought in draft form and eventually got declared law. And so I would say that from about 2020 onwards is when my journey started with understanding where the European market is moving with protecting their local economy, is what they're saying, leveling the playing field, because they have an energy trading system which is accounting for the carbon or the greenhouse gas emissions rather of their local producers, and they have to level the playing field for people importing. And that's where we then come into place. So the journey for us was to first of all understand what does it mean, what do they want us to report, and what is it going to cost for our importers if they buy our products. So our technical product team had to go and look at what does the common or the combined nomenclature codes that are part of these legislation, what do they specify? And they identified that our products, all of the aluminium products that we do, fall into 10 different CN codes when you export them into the EU. So now that we know which codes those are maybe low alloy metals, very thin gauge foil, low alloy metals of a higher gauge, can body stock, can end stock, plates of alloyed metal of different thickness ranges. So you've got your 10 codes. What do they want you to report? Well, they want to know exactly what is your scope 1 emissions embedded in that ton of metal that you sell. We sell our products, we sell mostly in coil format, so coils around about 10, 12 tons of weight. So when we export that coil, couple of coils to a customer somewhere in Europe, they want to know in which CN code does this coil fall. We have to identify it falls in that CN code. We then have to tell them what is the embedded Scope 1 emissions. That is the emissions that we emit on our factory site in Pietermaritzburg, and it mostly comes from the burning of fuel gas, in our case LPG and natural gas, 50-50 roughly. How much did we produce, or how much did we consume in the production of this 1 ton of that metal? Not overall for the factory, but that alloy, that metal during that quarter. Because if you change over quarters, you also have to account for that. So we had to think, how are we going to develop that ability to report that? And then the second factor is you also have to report on your Scope 2 emissions, which is what is embedded in your electricity consumption. And so you have to account for every kilowatt hour used in the production of that 1 ton of metal that you export. Now, in a factory like ours with 50 to 80 different processes and maybe 200 different combinations of alloys and thicknesses, etc., going through different combinations of processes, they all follow different routes to get to an end product. So there's no formula that you can apply universally to every product. And every alloy takes on the same process of, let's say, hot rolling, of getting the slab down into a coil. It will consume maybe double the electric energy for a hard alloy than for a soft alloy. So you have to account for all these differences. Fortunately, we were able to envisage how we're going to do this, because in 2019, it was the last time that I attended a conference here as a resource efficiency discussion. We said that we are developing a system, and we were piloting our first plant during that phase, where we said that we are, through our process monitoring systems, we are going to understand exactly when a coil starts being processed on a certain processing line and when it stops, and we will take the meter readings of the gas that was consumed during that process and the electricity consumed, and we called it our per lot resource consumption system. The idea was that we want to track every alloy going through the different machines and see where we are wasteful, where there's differences. If you have 3 machines that do the same thing, if you process a coil through, it's more efficient than through these 2, so what are you doing different here? Driven by a resource efficiency initiative, we started implementing a measurement system. 2020 came, and we understood that now there's a requirement for CBAM reporting. So in 2021, we started rethinking our whole strategy, and the whole year of 2022 was basically spent on, rather than focusing on where we use the most energy and trying to improve resource efficiency, get an energy balance across our whole factory for gas and for our main resources, gas and electricity, so that what comes in through the kilowatt hour meter from Eskom is accounted and allocated to all our products, so that you have an energy balance. Because for CBAM reporting, that's the most important thing. You need to be able to accurately allocate all of your energy to each of your products that leave the gate. So rather than focus on where the most energy goes and what happens there and try and optimize it, the focus was spread on balancing it across the company for electricity and for gas. Metering rollout, we spent maybe 1-2% of our annual bill for electricity and for gas over the last 3 years on improving metering across our site. So that was the major thing. All of the systems that go together with that, and all of the reporting that you then have to build to say, I've got a discrepancy. What happened? Why did I allocate more energy than what I actually used? And you see that there was rework or this or that, and you figure out how your system needs improvement until you get your energy balance right. So that was 2022. 2023, last year, we spent the first 3 quarters of the year preparing to report that in the specific EU format that they require CBAM reporting in, which is basically a spreadsheet. It's a normal Excel spreadsheet of a certain format, but you need to follow the rules of how you calculate what you fill into each of those sections. So we focused on getting our systems to extract the data from all of the 200,000 tons of metal that we produce, extract the customers that are in Europe, split it into the CN codes, fill it into the spreadsheet in the format so that we have an automated system to extract it from a manufacturing system data and populate the Excel spreadsheet, and then complement it with things like what do we pay for carbon tax in South Africa, because that gets deducted from what you have to pay into Europe. And then, so that was the first 3 quarters of last year. And then in Q4 last year, we actually had to submit, by the end of Q4, we had to submit the report for Q4 of last year. And we were able to do that by the end of January this year. So that was our first report handed in. And the templates have changed in the meantime. I think we're on revision 3 now, so every quarter we now report the tonnages exported, per CN code, all of the details. It includes our embedded carbon footprint coming from our suppliers of metal, our suppliers of alloying elements, and all the other factors that make part of that. So that's basically the journey we've been on since 2020.
Thanks so much, Henrik. I think what you can hear is that there are companies that are organizing themselves to be able to continue to remain competitive with these new requirements from CBAM. It sounds like a tremendous amount of effort has gone into being able to comply with the rules and regulations, with a tremendous amount of complexity and uncertainty if you're on revision 3 of the template. So as the template changes, I expect everything needs to change to be able to comply with the updated template. The main point of asking Henrik to lead is to try to locate this in the real world, in real South Africa, in industrial companies today. This isn't something that's still coming in the future. It's something that companies are having to deal with in the immediate. Shamila, I'll come to you in a second. Shamila is the CEO of the NBI and previously was with the JSE on sustainability, but representing a wide spectrum of businesses in South Africa, some of which will be next in line for CBAM. Obviously, with aluminium being in the first set of compliance, Hulamin is kind of first through the gate. Shamila, there's a CBAM, there's the Climate Change Act that's got sectoral emission targets. There seems to be a lot of complexity emerging in this space around reporting, compliance, and trying to ensure that companies can adjust their businesses to comply. Are there some key messages that you're hearing from your members, and what are the key messages that the NBI would like to bring to a forum like this?
Thanks, Mike, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to be here. It's a pleasure to be here.
Should we just check if the mic is on?
Testing. Is it coming through?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Morning, everybody. Thank you, Mike, and it's a pleasure to be here. So thank you for the invitation. I think Hendrik sketched for us already the practicalities, and from there you probably could already surmise some of what I was going to say. So certainly it is a concern. And I think it's from the point of concern that a number of companies are coming in, because whilst we're still in the process of understanding what, for example, the negotiations need to bring, common but differentiated responsibility, CBAM sort of come up, and I think the biggest concern has been that it's very much a unilateral measure. And that is what is the big concern. And how do we then adjust to that if we haven't, for example, even landed the right amounts of finance flows that we know we need as a support for a country? But the reality is that measures like CBAM are not going to stop there. We're already seeing those coming up in other jurisdictions already. We've got the UK, we've got Canada. And so there's a very real challenge to our export markets and those sectors that are exposed and who have a high carbon footprint. So as you can imagine, I think, Mike, one of the biggest sort of shifts we're starting to see and have seen already quite quickly has been, first and foremost, how do we start decarbonizing the energy mix and what we're using as companies. And so you're starting to see a lot of companies try to produce renewable energy or at least source renewable energy. We've certainly seen a huge amount of money flow from the private sector into investments in renewables. So that's the first place where we're seeing some of that change happen. Partially driven just out of necessity, right? And we see what's happened with load shedding over the last number of years. Basic business survival has actually been the first priority. Right? It would be a luxury to produce and be able to sell somewhere else, but just being able to produce and stay alive in the first place. So that is one of the challenges that has been front and center for companies, is just survival in the current context. So part of that shift that we're seeing into almost energy independence in some ways has been actually driven by security in the first place, and then of course coupled with what we're seeing as the challenge then is that if we want to be competitive, we want to maintain those markets, then we need to start having that. We're starting to see also a lot, not starting, but already a lot of conversations happening, trying to ensure that from a national perspective, from a government level, that those conversations are happening with trading partners and negotiating and understanding the standpoint as a country. So I'm starting, deliberately at the very high level, Mike, because it does talk to the climate change regime, the discussions that we're having. I'm sure Prof. Swilling will pick up on some of that, and what it's going to cost us to be able to finance the transition that the country has to undertake. The other thing that we're seeing is certainly the acceptance that the transition is going to happen. It's happened already in many spaces and will continue. What we need to then take control over is what we're doing to react and what we're doing to create the enabling environment for our industries to not only survive but to thrive, and to take the great opportunities that we also can see that can come off a transition to a greener economy. Hendrik's made very clear some of the pain that we're facing up front in being able to do that. And if you can imagine those industries and those companies that don't necessarily have the finance and the fiscal room balance sheet to be able to support the kinds of investments that might be needed to do rapid decarbonization, you can see where a lot of the concerns and the risks lie. And hence the broader conversation on the need for a just transition. And so being able to understand what that means, and of course bringing up the social context that we have in our country, the massive issues we have with unemployment, with inequality and with poverty, and needing to solve for multiple things at the same time. And so the need to understand what is the pace that we can manage, but understanding that these forces are greater than us in some ways. We are a small open economy, but we also have huge opportunity. The basic ingredients needed for being able to support a shift to a greener economy we have. We actually have fantastic capability in relation to research, in relation to innovation, energy, building systems and things like that. We have a young population that needs to be employed. They are, from the modeling, for example, that the NBI has done, is that there's a lot of opportunities sitting in that transition. And not only, for example, is a trajectory to net zero by 2050 possible, but is also potentially jobs positive if we move with the right enabling environment, the incentives, and the policy framework that will allow for those transitions. At the same time, we need to hold our line as a country in relation to the national negotiations, the international negotiations, to ensure that the money that we need to support that transition flows, which also means that we need to be clear about what our needs are. And this is where a collaborative, collective approach is absolutely imperative. As private sector, as government, we really need to understand what is going to be needed. Private sector is going to shoulder a lot of that responsibility, and so its need to be able to understand is going to be critical. So then to answer a little bit more on that question, Mike, we're seeing those investments in cleaner technology and renewable energy. We're certainly seeing a lot of, and perhaps not immediately obvious, but the search for the right skill sets. As you can imagine, it takes different skill sets to help companies understand how this can happen. And then, of course, we're seeing the leveraging of a lot of existing technologies in some of those industrials who are wanting to pivot to be able to make the shift and saying, what can we use as our basis already? I mean, a company like Sasol is a massive industrial, is pivoting using existing assets, for example, from shifting from a grey hydrogen to a green hydrogen. And how can you do that? So it's using what we have as considerable basis in terms of knowledge and expertise and pivoting, but looking also for those new skills. And that's tremendously exciting, I think, when we're sitting in a discussion today as to how do we then transition the skills base in our country? How do we ensure that our young people are really future fit into these kinds of opportunities that will pose really great opportunities, not only here, but also potentially create a skills base for the continent and other places in the world. And these are the opportunities that we need to see and move quickly on. We're also seeing a lot more investment in the research and development, but that again, I have to say again, is constrained against just trying to recover from what we've seen in terms of the big investments that had to flow into just ensuring energy security. So a more coordinated approach as a country and the enabling environment will allow for that money to be spent in the most productive way, rather than just quickly trying to find what are the renewable solutions that we can put on right now. But a coordinated approach will allow for that money to be spent better if we've got the right incentives and the enabling environment. And then some of the key messages, Mike, to your point, I think is that to see that the transition poses great opportunities. It is definitely a concern, of course, from the clear issues that have been outlined already, but there are those opportunities, and we have the chance to move quickly now to try to realize some of those in the next number of years. We do need to, I'm bringing back to the international as well, to support the country, because this is a whole of country change and we need to see it like that. Going into COP29 this year, one of the biggest things that we need to be looking at is the new collective quantified goal, and that's really about the financing and the flows to developing countries and emerging markets to allow them to make the transition. The finances that has been promised over the last number of years, the order of about $100 billion, is really a fraction, if you look at what the modeling is telling us, is really needed if you sum up the nationally determined contributions and what is actually needed to achieve those in the countries that have put those forward. And anything, and I know this is quite a wild range, but between $2 trillion and $8 trillion are the numbers that I've seen come up. And so our stance and our what we go into expecting to come out of that financing deal is going to be really important this year. And I think will also underscore the level of ambition that we can have as a country, given that next year we go to with enhanced, or rather the revised nationally determined contributions as a country. And we can't have those without understanding how's this going to happen, who's going to finance it, and where those challenges are going to lie. So I think for me, those are the key things we're seeing. I'm definitely seeing a lot more business interest in just understanding what is going to be required, and more active participation, for example, even in our negotiating position and stance as a country, and starting to really understand and what is it that we actually need. We know we need to do this. What do we go with as our ask, and saying we can do this, but this is what we're going to need to be able to do that. Thanks, Mike.
Awesome. Thanks, Shamila. I mean, I think that there's some great points that you've made there, but really around growth, financing, and clarity of what it is that we need as a country to be able to succeed with this transition.
Mike, can I just make one more point, actually? The big one, which came out of very clearly of Hendricks as well, is that we're seeing a big shift to understand reporting regimes and then the systems to be able to manage the data. Because what is required now has really been a big shift for companies, even quantifying Scope 3. And that's not just, for example, in a CBAM context, it's broadly in sustainability and ESG reporting, which even investors are pushing for quite strongly. So we're seeing that as a big pressure on companies right now.
Thanks, Shamila, and it's almost the perfect segue to Diego. Diego, firstly, welcome to South Africa, and I know you're reasonably new from UNIDO. It's wonderful to have you in the country, and wonderful to continue the collaboration with UNIDO. It's common cause that the development trajectories can't follow previous development trajectories. Could you give us a bit of a flavor of the thinking that sat behind some of these policy instruments? And then perhaps it links nicely to Shamila's point, is what are you seeing as the response? What does it mean for industrial production and consumption at kind of a global level or a continental level? And what are you seeing as the response for these reporting requirements? And then ultimately, who is it that should be financing some of the complexity that surrounds this transition? Thanks, Diego.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me? Is it okay? Okay. Thank you for inviting me, and good morning, everybody. Your question is unanswerable, I think. It's very complex. But, well, UNIDO stands for United Nations Industrial Development Organization, and our mandate is the inclusive and sustainable industrial development. So basically, we work towards developing sustainable industries, supporting the private sector, supporting the government on the policies, developing some technologies, but to support, not because industries per se are needed, but just because industries are a mean towards improving the quality of life of people. So we look at same thing for energy. is energy for development. It's not energy just because we want to have more things, but we need to look at the bigger picture, which is why do we need industries, or why do we need energy? And it's about a better life for everybody. And that's where a lot of the discussions become more interesting, because we talk about inclusiveness, we talk about just, we talk about sustainability, and all things that sounds complex and are complex, but they're needed. Climate change, as you have seen, it's here. It's with us. We have been discussing it for 28 years. We knew at that time, 28 years ago, we knew what the problem was. The doctors told us we are sick, we need to stop smoking. And we said, no, we know, now it's another reason, maybe this and that. 28 years later, we are now saying, oh, coughing, and well, maybe yes, maybe they were right. And so basically, we need to do it. So clearly, the rich countries and the developed countries were the ones that started. They have a high responsibility. It's called the common and differentiated responsibilities. But here in the South is where we are going to suffer the most. And so we can start discussing, and we kept discussing about, oh, who's going to pay the bills for the doctor, and we keep smoking. Or we can stop smoking and then keep discussing who's going to pay, but we need to stop smoking as soon as possible. And this is what we need to do, and that's its conversion from normal model of industrial development to a sustainable industrial development model. That, again, I repeat, has on its vision a social development aim. It's not just to make industries richer and to make the rich richer and the people, most of the people poorer, which is something that is happening in the world under this globalization. So we talk about we need globalization, but we need a more just globalization. And we need a more just system where the majority of the people benefit. If we see inequality in the world has increased everywhere. It's not just only South Africa, where levels are unacceptable, but if you look at Brazil, you look at India, you look at many countries and regions such as Latin America, where I come from, is one of the most unequal regions in the world. And we are very rich in natural resources. So Africa is very rich, Latin America is very rich in natural resources, but those resources have not benefited the majority. So we think that by transforming those resources in an efficient way, that's why we call resource efficiency, we can involve more people and we can make sure that the benefits go to more. Now, we have large industries and we have small industries, and we need to make sure that those large industries that are able to compete in the global market bring together also a value chain where the small and medium enterprises can also support and can be part of this development. So that's where UNIDO and the United Nations tend to work more on the poorer and on the small and medium enterprises, trying to support them. When we talk about the requirements, the reporting requirements, again, there will be the small and medium enterprises, the ones that do not have a whole staff just working on that will suffer the most. So, but this has happened it's not new. It has happened already for many years. I remember working, for instance, in the Forest Stewardship Council, in certification of forest products. It's one of the forests, timber is one of the resources that we have been using unsustainably. And so the thing was, how does small farmers or owners of forests particularly indigenous groups, could report on the sustainability of their resources. And well, there were mechanisms, financial mechanisms, support mechanisms that were put in place, and now today we have council, we have, I think it's a successful, it still needs to be worked, but it's a sector that is quite successful internationally on that. And that we can replicate with steel, with aluminium, with cars. Now I was told that Mercedes is already being blocked for exports. But what is at the base of this is that the world, the resources in the world are limited. Yeah? And that we knew it, I think it's 72, the famous report from the Norwegian Prime Minister. But so what do we do with what we have, and how do we make sure that we break this concentration of wealth into a few companies and a few people, and distribute it the more? And I think that's where we need to have another discussion on sustainable production and consumption. But that links to all of you that work in industries, because we need to think what we produce and why do we produce what we produce. You know, are we producing something that brings a benefit to the society, or we are just producing because we want to sell, we want to make money, then to do something? So the concept of sustainable consumption and production is also critical. The other element is financing. In the last 150 years, I will say 7 out of 10 richest companies in the world were related to energy. So there is money. There is money on energy. So somebody's making money. And energy, just as a sector that is required in Southern Africa, and particularly in South Africa. So how do we make sure that sector that makes money continue to make money, but they're not just 3 or 4 companies benefiting from it, but we share a bit of the profits. So by thinking differently, and in this case, I touched my last point on innovation. We have a great opportunity to think differently. Nobody knows better the conditions of South Africa or Southern Africa or Africa than you do. Nobody's going to come and tell you what, you know, the perfect solution for South Africa unless you're a South African. So if we wait for Google to do something for us, you know, it's going to be not perfect. We can adapt to the solution, but the artificial intelligence is going to create a lot of problems for many people, for many of us. There will be loss of jobs, but there are great opportunities. It's like the use of cell phones and things like M-Pesa when it was developed. We couldn't imagine what the cell phones will be, the internet will be. And so we need to start working on innovation. Otherwise, the work of CSIR, the work of the Research Institute, the work of government in investing in innovation and research is very, very important. So we need to see all these challenges as opportunities, and to see how do we adapt what we have and the challenges ahead for the benefit of the conditions of South Africa. Because as I said, nobody will be able to give you the perfect solution unless they understand what you need. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Diego. And I mean, there's some incredible points in there. I think we've known about the problem for a long time and are now finding actions. I'd love to come back to innovation a little later, because I think I totally agree. This is the key theme to try to solve this problem. And you also touched on something that despite understanding the problem and despite efforts, or our best efforts, there is increasing global inequality. And Prof, I'd like to come to you in a sec. Professor Swilling has thought and written and built incredible activities in sustainability, and I think is a little bit of a national treasure, and it's wonderful to have you on the panel, Prof. South Africa is already incredibly unequal. Do you see these myriad regulations, global commitments, resulting tax regimes, barriers, and reporting? Do you see this supporting the needs of a developing world context like South Africa? Do you see a direct relationship between decreasing our inequality and meeting some of our developmental needs with some of these global pressures? And perhaps you can touch on how you can see that, how it will work in your mind.
Well, it's a major challenge. I mean, the just transition has become a global narrative because it's addressing that issue of the link between decarbonization and inequality. South Africa was the first country in the world to include the just transition in its NDC, and for good reason. Southern Africa is warming at twice the rate, the global average, and it is the location for the greatest amount of poverty and inequality. So it's unsurprisingly that out of this context comes the notion of a just transition, which is trying to address this issue. But the just transition in the South African, but I also think beyond us, is used in 4 different ways. For some, the just transition is just about decarbonization in order to re-stimulate economic growth so that you can have trickle-down flows of wealth to the poor, and in that way have a just outcome. Rand Merchant Bank published a paper on that, or made a statement of that nature about 2 years ago. The second position is decarbonization plus social mitigation to deal with the consequences, the negative consequences of on coal communities and coal workers of the energy transition. So that's decarbonization plus social mitigation. The third position is decarbonization plus social mitigation plus upstream industrialization, where the energy transition is perceived, or decarbonization via an energy transition is perceived as a catalyst for re-industrializing economies. So that goes back to your question to Diego. What's the new industrial paradigm? That's the third position. And the fourth position is similar to the third position, articulated mainly by trade unions and radical NGOs, which says, yes, decarbonization, yes, social mitigation, yes, upstream industrialization, but that's only possible in the context of a post-capitalist transformation. So when it comes to the inequalities in the South African context, we need to be very clear on what we mean. It's not just income inequality. All the recent research and data based on the Sal-Drew databases at UCT show that roughly 85% of all personal wealth is in the hands of 10% of the population. And 54% of all personal wealth in South Africa is in the hands of 1% of the population. And most of that 1% is white, and most of it is male in terms of who owns the wealth, and it excludes family trusts. And we know that a lot of rich people keep their wealth in family trusts. So this level of inequality is gross, extreme, and completely and utterly unsustainable. You cannot have a just transition that does not touch this level of inequality. An unjust transition is a distinct possibility in the world that we have today. So just to talk about more specifically what we can how we can start thinking about addressing this, and I want to do that by sharing the work that I'm coordinating for the National Planning Commission that will result in a report that goes to the President in the next 6 months. And that, what we have done over the last 2.5 years is run very detailed, quite expensive studies into the investment requirements to achieve the infrastructure goals of the National Development Plan, with respect in particular to energy, water, digital infrastructure, and logistics. which are the 4 pillars of the National Infrastructure Plan 2050, NIP 2050, that was approved by Cabinet. And what we are focusing on is what is the gap between what we currently spend on these infrastructures and what we should be spending if we actually are serious about achieving the goals. And the numbers are starting to surface. Let me give you some of those numbers. As far as energy is concerned, our estimate is that over the next 10 years to 2035, we should be looking at spending 1.5 trillion rand, roughly 140 billion each year. As far as water is concerned, we need more than that. We need 2.1 trillion because our water system is collapsing with very, very detrimental consequences, in particular for the poor. And we need roughly 40 to 50 billion extra per annum for our digital infrastructure. So roughly 500 billion. Now the question is, where's this money going to come from? We have conservative fiscal policies, austerity policies, and we have conservative monetary policies. Traditionally in industrial societies, you fund infrastructure either by printing money or borrowing and taxing. We're not going to do either of those. No Keynesianism, no QE. We're going to, those two policy frameworks remain strongly in place under the current leadership. So where's the money going to come from? And so that's the other study that we are doing, which is to do a detailed analysis of the architecture of the financial ecosystem of South Africa in order to determine what kinds of what we call elasticity spaces may exist, where you can focus on balance sheet reconfigurations that allow you to unlock capital. Underneath this overall approach, which is called the monetary architecture approach, is the assumption that in a credit-based system, a financial system is a web of interlocking balance sheets. In other words, everyone's asset is somebody else's liability and vice versa. If that is true, you should be able to map the system. And if you can map the system, you can start identifying potential sources of capital that are not exclusively on the national budget or on the central bank balance sheet, but can be unlocked through creative collaborations between a multiplicity of different kinds of financial institutions in order to make available the kind of investment capital that we need. Let me give you one example. The pension funds. The pension funds, the value of the funds in our pension industry, which is one of the biggest pools of capital. It's bigger than India, it's bigger than France, bigger than Spain. It's a huge amount of capital. It is worth about 80% of our GDP. Less than 10% of that capital actually goes into the real economy. An even smaller percentage of that goes into infrastructure, and 45% leaves the country. This is a balance sheet configuration that is completely out of line with the Constitution and with our commitment to the National Development Plan and its goals. Sure, if you would like to retire without being able to switch on the switch and have electricity and without being able to turn on the tap and have water, yeah, you can continue to support the asset managers who sit in Camps Bay at their laptops in coffee shops, spinning money around buying and selling paper in order for your pensions to be worth something. But why retire with money when the infrastructure around you is collapsing? You can make money out of infrastructure, and our pension funds all around the world invest heavily in pension funds and make money for their members, so that you have a double benefit. You retire with the money, with your savings that have improved, and you have functioning infrastructures. But that's not how we think in South Africa. The same applies to the shadow banks, which have massively expanded since 1994. They make money by making money, by putting more money into paper, which doesn't go into the real economy. And that's 3.2 trillion rands worth of capital locked away in the shadow banks. The DFIs, Development Bank, IDC, Land Bank, are actually very small, only about 350 billion in total in terms of the assets that they control. They should be 10 times that size if you compare them to many other parts of the world, and they should fall under the central bank like they do in many other parts of the world, so you can benefit from the balance sheet of the central bank. I'm just giving you throwing away just a couple of examples of what is required for us to completely rethink the architecture of our financial system, and this is completely consistent with the African position. The Africa Climate Summit that took place in September last year in Kenya issued the Nairobi Declaration. It would be so interesting to find out how many people in this room have read the Nairobi Declaration. It is absolutely critical, especially the last part, which is where heads of African states say the global financial architecture, the architecture of the global financial system needs to be transformed if Africa is going to be able to access the kinds of funding that is required to address African challenges on terms that benefit once and for all African interests and not everybody else's interests. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Prof. I'm not going to attempt to synthesize too much because that was incredible. I did want to just pull out the one thing that I heard really loudly, is that we need to invest in the real economy. And Henrik is a representative of the real economy with equipment, with plant, with labor, building things to consume. And I wanted to try to bring us back into basically the real economy now. Henrik, you've heard from both Diego and Prof. Swilling. Does some of what they say resonate with you and your experience? Is there some maybe further granular detail that you can share around what does that investment look like from your business? You mentioned 1 to 2% of turnover to be able to get ready for the kind of reporting that you guys have done. But maybe you can just briefly sketch, what does the team look like? What support did you require or get to be able to put a team together to be able to operate in the real economy as Hulamin?
Okay. Well, yes, after hearing all of those statistics and the global economy or the local South African economy, I come back to my little village in Pietermaritzburg where my life resides. And
That's what matters.
So I want to answer then two questions. The one is, what did it take for us to be able to do the reporting that I referred to earlier? We are a very small team. It's myself and a sustainability manager who does this physical reporting and the pulling of the data together. I've got 2 resource efficiency team members with a third vacancy, so I should say 3 people on the resource efficiency team looking at trying to improve resource efficiency, but also dealing with the data gathering and integrity issues, and trying to transition what we had to sidetrack, which started as a resource efficiency initiative, sidetrack into being able to report for CBAM, and now that we've got that more or less on track, revisit the data and see what it's actually delivering for us now and provide us with insights into our processes, how they behave, and where the losses are that we can improve upon. So that's kind of the focus. That's more or less the team. But then very importantly, there's an IT team, our in-house IT systems that run the servers and the data gathering networks and all of the infrastructure. And they are a very dedicated and competent team that develop all of these methodologies for us to allocate energy to a certain process, to a certain product or coil or lot that was being processed. So I guess apart from my team, then I have to recognize that there's maybe one person full-time in the IT for the last, let's say, 2-3 years dedicated to this, plus my team then doing a little bit more than just sustainability reporting, but also focusing on resource efficiency improvements. So that's kind of the investment. And then around the kind of environment in which we operate, if I can come back to what was mentioned, you know, Hulamin functions in South Africa, and we can't change South Africa. We can influence it to a degree, and that's it. So we need to have a healthy environment in which to operate, and I guess that's what a conference like this is about, and where the different government departments and the DTIC, etc., comes in. We need our electricity grid to be greened. I mean, that's kind of obvious to everybody at this point, I would think. But I think most of all, it needs to be affordable. I listen to some podcasts, and people will throw around numbers like, if you increase your GDP to $5,000 US per person, then people actually start caring about the environment. Below that, you're below where they can even think about it. If they don't know where tomorrow's meal and education and whatever funds are going to come from, forget about the environment. So you need an economic level of well-being, if I can call it that, before people, and that's the majority of our nation, start being interested in the environment. And I think that underlying that is good quality, reliable, cheap, green electricity. So that's got to be a number one priority for the country in my books. Of course, then it would help industries like ourselves. We have embarked on our own program because we are under pressure and we don't have time. So we are in the process of negotiating a power purchase agreement which will replace roughly 45% of our electricity needs from an IPP that generates it with solar power and storage and whatever else in future. That was the easy bit because solar PV is cheaper than Eskom, so it's kind of a no-brainer, just go and do it. Where the rest of the energy is going to come from when you're outside of the solar PV curve, that remains a problem for the years to come, so I guess I will still have a job. Yeah, that's a major challenge. But if it can be solved on a national level to some degree, then industry and individuals will look after the rest, but you need to enable industry and individuals to be able to do that. So that's kind of the limits to where I can venture onto that side of things. On a practical side, we don't have infrastructure servicing our site. We have a rail line, a siding that belongs to us, but it's been decommissioned because there's no rail service. So we truck all of our ingots from Richards Bay to the Hulamin site by road, very expensive. Can we not get the rail going again? Then we truck everything from Pietermaritzburg to the Durban port, and then there's port delays. So the port infrastructure and the efficiency of the port affects our on-time deliveries. Our imports get affected by it. So rail infrastructure, I think it was mentioned probably as part of logistics, is what my understanding was. That's a national program. But if we can I see movement towards letting private companies interact, because I think enable private companies to focus on certain sections that they can manage, rather than trying to do it for the country, which seems like a massive job to me. We have to truck all of our gas in to site because we don't have a gas pipeline. So the gas pipeline stops in Durban, 80 kilometers away. There's the whole N3 corridor that's being developed. I know that the future is perhaps not natural gas, because who knows what's going to happen with hydrogen. It seems to me like it's still very expensive and far away. But in the meantime, we need to survive. So if there's a program to help us and other industries along the N3 corridor to have pipeline gas, it would cut our gas costs by more than half. So that will make us able to compete and sustain our industry, keep the jobs that we have, keep people in our community, lots of other industries that depend on Hulamin, so help create that market where people have a level of income that enables them to start caring for the environment, because we live next to the Duzi River, which is so polluted. The Duzi Marathon is at risk every year of not being able to take place, etc., etc. It's just a symptom of a failing water infrastructure system that ends up polluting the Duzi, etc., etc. So I think that's kind of where these things come to life for me in my little village.
Thanks so much, Henrik. And it really is critical to locate a lot of this thinking in practical, controllable, measurable, deliverable infrastructure. And I think that's kind of the integration that these 2 days are about. I wanted to pick up again on innovation. And Shamila, businesses drive innovation, businesses procure innovation. Can you already see some opportunities, some green shoots of entrepreneurship that are coming to solve some of these problems?
Certainly, Mike. entrepreneurship you're seeing, I think, is in some places where you would expect and others where you would not. One of the
Microphone is not working.
No, still not working. Testing. There we go. I think we're back. Okay. Thank you. So, Mike, the innovation we're seeing is coming both from where you would expect in solving issues and in other areas perhaps slightly, I think, less obvious. So when I think about it, one of the programs we do jointly with Green Cape is the Climate Finance Accelerator. And I like that as a very practical example, because what that is doing is preparing businesses that are locating their activities and their services in largely powering the green economy, and so are things that are focused on things like waste management, energy, mobility, clean mobility, and things like that. And what we've seen over the last number of years is incredible little businesses that are springing up in that area. And whilst the program that we run is not necessarily intended to match them with financing, what it has shown is that even with that, not that being intended consequence, the effort that we've put into just trying to prepare them to be able to attract the financing and pitch to financiers, for example, has grown them, and that's that little bit of boost has matched a number of companies already. I think at last it was like somewhere close to R1 billion, Mike, if we remember correctly, and that was from not even trying to have the match. So that isn't just a few companies that we've had access to, and those, like I mentioned, the solutions are around anything from in the renewable energy space to electric mobility to waste management, and solving just practical challenges that we have, but doing them in a manner that is scalable ideally and that is replicable. And some of those little companies that came through programs like that, you will see on billboards on the highway. I saw Wetility the other day and was quite proud to say that it's one of those that came through programs like that. So because we work directly in those spaces, you can start to see how that's coming through. What's incredibly, I think, encouraging is that many of these are businesses that are being run and started by younger people who are seeing those opportunities and who want to solve real challenges. And if you listen to the stories, are often those that arose from within the communities in which they operate, or in some instances, if they've been in companies and seen that actually here's a space that there's something that is not served, and growing it from there. And so in some ways, a typical story of how innovation happens, but in spaces that are very much needed. So we're certainly seeing those. But Mike, I think what I also want to talk about from a green shoot perspective slightly differently is really looking at how we're seeing some of the pivots firstly internally, and I mentioned one of those earlier on, is that within companies you're seeing this intrapreneurship also starting to happen that are looking at adjacent things. And, like we said, nobody would know our country better than and be able to tell, to say what is needed in many companies as well that are existing as employers, is to be able to say people within those companies are able to see where those opportunities lie. There's also, I think, what feels like a mini revolution happening in particularly young people's awareness and consciousness of the need to change. And that in itself is spurring a big difference. Firstly, even in some of the careers that they're now choosing to opt into that would not have been traditionally attractive, but that are really serving, and they're looking for what can I do to make a difference? And that's usually what people say has been sort of the catch-all, but really what it's saying is, can I contribute to the greener growth, to different shoots, to being able to solve social challenges and to be dealing with environmental ones, and inherently finding that appealing, which I think is a great turnaround that we're starting to see. And moving away, ideally, away from the problem that, the kind of thinking that created the problems we're in right now, to moving away and saying, but what can we do differently and how do we shape that? We're also seeing green shoots in financing, different non-traditional financing mechanisms that are enabling some of these things to then grow and thrive. So if you look at that, if you look at things like crowdsourcing, new platforms that are happening that reduce the entry level, the cost to being able to do that, and different types of money coming in. You're also seeing and this is a nice problem to have, I guess, because we've already outlined the poverty challenge in the country, but where you have inheritance of intergenerational wealth, particularly millennials and the like, you're starting to see that what they want to spend their money on is different, where they want to work and what they want to work in is different. And so hopefully some of those little dots will join up and give us the groundswell we need to power this shift. And to talk a little bit more practically and differently to some of the challenges that Hendrik's spoken about, the other green shoots I think that we're seeing are definitely more collaboration between business and government to help create that enabling environment that we need in the very first place. If we don't have that infrastructure, even if you have the best innovations and things, it's just going to work around where it could really get scale if it worked in a bigger space, right? And so if we can create just that baseline enabling infrastructure, start dealing with the logistics crisis, I think energy, we're sort of better on track a little bit now. And so those business partnerships that are growing with government, I think, are incredibly important. And it's critical that we can grow those. The elephant in the room when you're looking at just what money you can spend versus money you have is dealing with corruption as well. In school, when I did accounting, they said you have money coming in and you have money going out. Corruption is a massive cost line item that ultimately can bankrupt us. And if we don't take that seriously, all of these wonderful things that we have an opportunity and a massive opportunity to change are just going to be very deeply curtailed. So I think for me, even there, starting to see, I think, greater will to be able to start tackling those issues is something we all need to work together to ensure grows, because those things are the things that can help ensure that we don't lose hope, that we're able to do that, and when we're looking at innovation, for example, that we see that there's a real opportunity to grow. And you're not going to be curtailed by environments that require backhands and all kinds of things and rent-seeking behavior. And we need to understand that that is a critical part of also inspiring innovation, is that is a big part of the enabling environment too. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, thanks very much, Samina. I think that enabling environment and the context to have repeatable paths for entrepreneurs to succeed and for innovation to succeed is a key success factor for adopting innovative technologies. Diego, I wanted to come back to you around innovation in particular, and with a number of cleaner production centers across the continent boosting competitiveness, how does UNIDO see the role of kind of primary research, applied research, and then industrial competitiveness, that interface with innovation?
Thank you. I think in the new global context of technology development and particularly artificial intelligence, we need to think differently. We need to innovate at all levels. I don't know if there's a problem with the microphone. Do you hear well?
Yes.
Okay. Nowadays, it becomes essential. Innovation will be the future. We cannot. The technologies are moving. Maybe the cycles of the past were maybe 25 years. Before it was 50 years, 25, and now we are going into technology cycles of 2 years, perhaps. So it's going to be very, very very quick. But I'm very, sometimes in these panels, you get a feeling of frustration and negativeness, because people that are listening may say, okay, what can we do in front of all of this? I have my small enterprise and I want to do things, but what can I do from my side? And I'm very, very optimistic, particularly the companies in South Africa, with the load shedding, with limited water, with problems with infrastructure, and they're flourishing. There are so many companies doing so well, and some others are struggling, but they're still there. So I'm very confident, and the history of South Africa is a history of resilience and power, and I think that's where we have to build on, and we have to make sure that through innovation, because education will be critical, that we adapt to the coming challenges. There will be enormous challenges. In fact, globally, there is a Summit of the Future taking place very soon, and it's about reforming the whole financial system to deal with the real needs of today's world, which are not the ones that were after the Second World War, so in 1945. And also what the multilateral system, how it works, how it's represented, and how governments interact with each other. So there is a need today to look as human beings, to rethink where do we want to be and we see today many wars where the stronger can destroy the weaker just by just pure force, and nobody can say anything, nobody can react. or we can shout, but there are no solutions. So there is a whole restructuration, I think, of the economy, the global governance, the international governance that needs to come into place. But from the point of view of the entrepreneur in South Africa, I think all these are opportunities, are great opportunities that the government, I'm also optimistic about the new government, the government of national unity, the new vision, the commitments that have been set, put forward. Now I hope this is realized with our support, but the policies needs to be there to give the private sector security, a long-term vision that where they're reassured that if they do certain things, they can have a result as it has planned. So I think there is an economist called Mariana Mazzucato that talks about innovation and the role of government in innovation, and how most of the companies, international companies, have benefited from the investment of the government on innovation. And she talks about Google, Apple, and all the big companies, particularly in the US, that have benefited from this. So if we want to have good industries here coming up, we need to really invest on both pure research and applied research. Otherwise, we will be left behind in the world where equality is not the norm. Thank you.
Thanks, Diego. And Prof, I'd like to come to you in a sec just to ask for your thoughts or reflection on primary and applied research and innovation. And perhaps if you could include in your reflection something around the existing government budgets and existing government fiscus. We've heard from Henrik that some of the infrastructure challenges that Hulamin is facing are outside of their ability to influence and control. And Shamilia's talked about the cost of corruption that exists in government budgets. Is there space for innovation? Are we innovating? And is there a role for primary and applied research to enhance the competitiveness of how our economy can function?
Well, I think the core message of my previous input is that we shouldn't expect fiscal policy, in other words, government budgets, to carry the entirety of the burden. The next step in the logic of that proposition is to say we therefore need to focus on blended finance solutions. And blended finance solutions are emerging across the world. And it's one of the most creative, innovative spaces in the global financial system. And there are two significant initiatives in the South African context, one of which is the Infrastructure Fund, which the DBSA was requested by the President to set up. And it is actually South Africa's biggest blended finance vehicle, which has got 100 billion rand allocation over 10 years from the fiscus in order to leverage 900 billion from the private sector, and in particular from the pension funds. And the other blended finance vehicle is in the water sector, which is the Water Agency. And so these are two examples of recent initiatives that have emerged out of a context where there's recognition of the limits of fiscal policy on the one hand, and the potential for mobilizing new or unlocking new flows of capital for infrastructure on the other hand. And I think we need to focus on that in much greater detail. Another example is there's a World Bank team that I met on Monday night in Cape Town that is working on a guarantee mechanism, a ZAR-denominated guarantee mechanism that could bring down the cost of capital substantially. And if we don't figure out ways to bring down the cost of capital, because in a sense the cost of capital is artificially high in South Africa because of a perception of systemic risk. Now, you're not going to get rid of systemic risk overnight. And so you can't wait for systemic risk to go down and all the cost of capital to go down, because actually by the time while you're doing that, things are getting worse. So you do need creative, box clever kind of mechanisms to deal with that perception of systemic risk, so that you can bring down the cost of capital, so that you can start mobilizing the kinds of large-scale investments into infrastructure, which then start to create the kind of virtuous circle that we're wanting. So actually there is quite a lot of innovation taking place, in particular led by the development finance institutions. But that's not enough. The private sector still has to come to the party in a big way. And just one other thing, you made a comment about business leads innovation. Well, Mariano Mazzucato's contention is that's not true. That government plays a key role in investing in not just R&D, but the early phases of the innovation cycle in order to de-risk so that the private sector can then move in. So it's this synergy, and that's what blended finance is, between public and private sectors in order to create the kinds of virtuous circle that we're looking for.
Thanks very much, Prof. I think we're just about out of time for the panel, but I would like to offer everyone an opportunity for some closing thoughts or a closing remark that you'd like to leave with the room as this conference kicks off. Perhaps if Shamila, I can start with you and then move one by one to the end of the room.
Very quick, Mike. I think that this is the change that we need to see is an all-of-society approach, and we've heard why. And every player, I think, is going to have their role. But I think what I'd like us to, all of us in our own mind, is to really have a strong vision of what we would like that future to look like. And in every space that we occupy, to see what we can do to create that. And it really is for all of us to find those spaces and to think what new needs to look like. And I know I always say this because I've heard it once and it stuck with me, is that if we don't invest in that future we want, then the one that we get is going to be worth infinitely less. And we're in that space now where we have a real opportunity to shift, but we need to do it quickly.
Good, thank you. I think I'm going to end with two comments. The one is about the South African economy and the legislation. We talk about CBAM, and obviously it's a big risk to a company like Hulamin and every other exporting entity in South Africa. So what do we do about that? We mitigate the risk. We're going and buying renewable electricity, etc., etc. But there's a national legislative side to that. If we pay carbon tax in South Africa, that gets deducted from what we have to pay into Europe. Personally, I'm not an economist, but it would make sense to me that the money stays in South Africa rather than paid to them. But it needs to be managed properly and invested into generating a sustainable economy for ourselves. So that's my view, limited as it may be, on that topic. And then the other one is that if we don't introduce the equivalent of our own CBAM or the European CBAM for South Africa, then our competitors out there are going to start dumping their product in South Africa without having to pay our CBAM equivalent. And we're going to pay carbon tax in South Africa, and that will make us less competitive again. So there's lots of risks in this space still for our local companies. And so that's the more broader economic and legislative side of it. And the other thing then I think connects nicely with what was said, Shamila, just now. We are faced with having to think about new things that we never thought about. As industry, being engineering manager for how long? Serving in the industry for 30 years, we now have to think about where we buy our electricity from. It never used to be a concern to anybody before. You get it from Eskom, of course. But now we see that there's opportunities for optimization when we do that. There's opportunities in the PMB region for us to optimize not only where we buy our electricity from, but there's lots of paper and pulp industry around the Pietermaritzburg forestry related stuff. They've got lots of wood waste. They throw it away, they try and get rid of it. Why don't we use that to generate electricity? We are in early discussions exploring those opportunities, but I'm saying that it needs courage to embark on projects like this to explore the possibilities, because you have to simply do what you can do, otherwise you're going to die.
At a conference on sustainable industries, I suppose what I need to say is nothing's possible without money. And as South Africans, we have a very poor understanding of money. and that has to change. Let me give you one very small example. In the last 2 to 3 years, we've put 6 gigawatts of renewable energy on rooftops. Do you know how much money that cost? It was about 80 billion rand. If you would have said 5 years ago, is there 80 billion rand available for 6 gigs on rooftops? The banking sector probably would have said no. But we did it. That's proof that you can reconfigure balance sheets and mobilize capital without a single extra cent from the fiscus.
Thank you. I think that we have been discussing about sustainable industries, cleaner production, climate change for many, many years. Now it is here, it's now, and thanks to the work of the National Cleaner Production Centers and many research institutions, governments around the world, we understand the consequences of all of this better, and I see this as an opportunity. Now there is no way back. Some time ago we could think, oh, I keep doing my own business and I will sell maybe less. Now it's we change or we're out. And I think there are great opportunities, particularly for the young people, startups, to think differently, to produce things for a better quality, for a better condition of all, new products, new ways of doing things that are allowed for these new technologies that are coming up and that use less resources, that are more sustainable. And so I'm very positive on this front. Thank you.
Thank you. Then thank you very much, everyone. Good luck with the rest of the conference. Thank you to the organizers, and please join me in thanking the panel.
Everybody, are we on now? We're on. I don't think we can underestimate the what it takes to hold together a panel, especially one made up of such significant minds. So thank you, Mike. We really appreciate it. It was an enormously helpful opening to the event. I hope you've all written down some comments and questions in your notes that you're going to take forward into the next 2 days, because wow, if you haven't got questions, if you haven't got an objection, if you haven't got an argument, if you haven't got something, you haven't been listening. I promise you, somebody said something you didn't agree with, I hope. And somebody said something you really agree with, I hope. So we're going to break for tea now, and then I'm going to ask everybody to please just grab yourself a cup of tea, snack or something, and then make your way back into the venue that you choose. By 11 o'clock, be seated by 11 so that we can kick off. In this room, we will have the session called Smart Solutions for Industry. And in the Ruby Auditorium, there's going to be practical examples where we've got some of the companies we work with doing case studies. So here we'll be talking big data, we'll be talking smart metering, etc. And over there, we'll be talking practical solutions. So enjoy the tea break, and thanks again for being a great audience.